When I decided to leave my family and move to a strange place for my husband, I never imagined that one day I would be standing here. It all started with a phone call, a lie, and a choice I couldn't understand. Was I too trusting of the person I loved, or was I simply deceived for too long? My life changed completely in one night, and now I don't know how to move forward. When my husband and I decided to move to a new state for his job, I never imagined that I would feel so lonely. He has always been the most important person in my life, and I wanted to support him in everything he did. However, when we arrived, I began to realize that I was all alone. Everyone around him was new, while I didn't know anyone here. I missed my family, friends, and the people I had left behind, but for his sake, I tried to push through. We had known each other since high school, and I watched him struggle as he had to take care of his daughter on his own. She was the result of a relationship between him and an older teacher, but he always tried his best to be a good father. I remember the days when he struggled between school and taking care of her, and I was always there to help him, even looking after her when he couldn't. Over time, we grew closer, and our feelings for each other developed. When he proposed to me, I didn't hesitate to accept, because I believed we could get through anything together. His daughter also bonded with me well, and we created a warm environment for her. Our relationship, though complicated, seemed to be strong and enduring. He was the man I admired, and I was the wife he could trust. Moving to a new state was a challenge, but we were determined to start a new chapter in our lives. However, when we first arrived, a sense of loneliness lingered inside me. I had no one to talk to except for him, and the fact that I didn't know anyone here made me feel suffocated. At first, I tried to stay positive, but the loneliness kept growing. Every day, I could only watch him work and cherish the few moments he was free. I wanted to build a new life here, but it wasn't easy. My husband also felt the pressure, as he had to adjust to his new job, and things weren't going as we had hoped. On top of that, his daughter and her mother moved in with us, which made it even harder for me to find space for myself. While I couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place, I kept telling myself that things would get better as time passed. I kept reassuring myself that this was the right decision to support him and his family. But I didn't expect this change to make me feel like I was losing myself, and the feeling of loneliness just kept growing inside me. Although I had spent a long time in the new state, I still felt like I couldn't fit in. My husband was busy with his new job, and I was left wandering around the large house with no one to talk to. My feelings for my husband hadn't changed, but I began to feel exhausted from handling everything on my own. The loneliness grew every day. One of the reasons I stayed patient was his daughter. The relationship between E and me, though not entirely easy, had started to show some progress. E was a smart and sensitive girl, but at times she seemed distant, perhaps because she wasn't used to having me in her life. Still, I never wanted her to feel abandoned. I tried to be close and be her friend, taking her to school, cooking together, even doing things she liked like baking or just chatting. For me, this wasn't just a responsibility, but also a way to prove my love for the family. I knew that for a child like E, having another mother figure wasn't easy, and I didn't want to be the one who disrupted her relationship with her father. The times we baked or watched cartoons together, I felt a little closer, even though there were still invisible walls between us. However, despite my efforts, I realized that E had a special bond with her biological mother, and I couldn't replace that. In fact, I didn't want to replace her. I just wanted to be a friend, a stepmother, who could share her worries and joys. Still, there were many times when I felt like an outsider. My husband sometimes didn't understand how I felt. He was so busy with work and the issues from his past family that he didn't notice how I was struggling with loneliness in our own home. When I had free time, I tried to participate in E's activities, but I always felt like I was on the outside of a story I couldn't truly be a part of. She had her own relationships with her friends and her mother, and I couldn't change that. I knew that while I loved her and wanted to help, my place in her life was something difficult to define. Nevertheless, I couldn't give up. I kept spending time with E, trying to take care of her and build a stronger bond with her. But in my heart, there was always a worry that couldn't be erased. Could I continue being this companion in her life without ever feeling like an outsider? One night, everything changed suddenly. I was sitting on the couch, enjoying one of the rare, peaceful moments, when my husband received a phone call from E's mother. At first, I didn't think much of it, just noticing that he stepped outside to talk privately, not wanting to disturb me. But when he came back, I could sense something was different. He looked tense and uncomfortable, a look I had never seen before. He sat down next to me and started talking about something I couldn't have imagined. He told me that E had said I had hit her while he was away. I was shocked and couldn't believe my ears. I had been there all along, taking care of E, being a friend to her, and now I was facing such an accusation. I immediately denied it, insisting that I had never done such a thing, but his gaze seemed to have changed. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. I tried to explain, recounting every detail of the times I had cared for E, the times we baked together, watched movies, or just talked. Everything had been peaceful and full of affection, and I couldn't understand why E would lie like this. But it seemed like he wasn't listening. My explanations didn't seem enough to convince him. The feeling of being doubted in my own home was heartbreaking. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, but I couldn't do anything except insist that I hadn't done it. He didn't say anything else, just stood up, grabbed his car keys, and rushed out the door. The door slammed behind him, leaving me in an empty house with an overwhelming sense of confusion and fear that I couldn't express. I called him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. Each unanswered call felt like a stab in the heart. The feeling of being left alone, with no one by my side in such a crucial moment, made me feel deceived and lonelier than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced endlessly. I tried to think about whether something in my actions had made E misunderstand, but I couldn't find anything. I didn't know what to do anymore, and I couldn't understand why my husband would believe E's lie. In my desperation, I decided to call him from a stranger's number, hoping for a chance to explain. But when he realized it was me, he immediately hung up. That made me feel like my world was falling apart. The next morning, when he still hadn't come back, the distance between us felt even more real. It was like I had lost everything, my trust in the person I loved and believed in. At that moment, I didn't know what to do anymore. I just knew that this relationship had changed forever. Everything seemed to collapse when I had to face the pain alone. My husband didn't come back. There was no explanation or communication from him. In the days that followed, I had to manage on my own, being pregnant and feeling anxious, because I didn't know what was going to happen. Especially when I realized that I couldn't continue this life by myself. I needed him there, but he wasn't. The feeling of being abandoned only made me fall into a state of confusion that was hard to describe. Even though I felt betrayed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I called him repeatedly, hoping something would change, hoping he would hear me, but he didn't answer. I also didn't know whether he truly believed what his daughter had said or if he simply didn't want to face me. When I gave birth, I thought he would show up, at least to see his son being born, but no. I never imagined he would reject my call when I tried to inform him from an unfamiliar number, trying to let him know I had given birth. At that moment, I felt utterly desperate. It wasn't until I saw him unexpectedly show up at the hospital that I began to understand that things might not be as simple as I had thought. He looked exhausted, sleep-deprived, and seemed to have gone through a very tough time. When he walked into my room, his eyes were filled with concern and regret. He said that after hearing the room had been paid for by my father, he realized he had been wrong. He had let his emotions lead him, and now he understood there was no reason to doubt me. Although his appearance brought a bit of relief, I still couldn't forget the feeling of being betrayed. He apologized repeatedly, but I couldn't erase what had happened. He wanted to see our son, but I couldn't easily accept it. While I didn't feel completely cold-hearted, I knew we had changed too much, and my trust had been broken. I didn't know if I could continue living with a man who had doubted me without even listening. In the end, I asked him to leave. I couldn't bear the disappointment and hurt anymore. He left, but I knew that I would never forget what had happened. No matter how much he regretted it, I felt like I had lost trust in him forever. In my heart, the decision had been made. I needed to move on without him. After he left, I felt like a part of my life had crumbled. I returned to my family, but things were never the same. Although I didn't say it, the pain was present every day. I loved him, I still loved him, but I couldn't forgive what he had done. I couldn't continue living in a relationship where trust had been broken so severely. A week after he left, I made an important decision. I contacted a lawyer and began the divorce process. It wasn't easy, not only because I still loved him, but because I didn't want my son to grow up in a broken family. But I couldn't live in deception and doubt anymore. Everything had become crystal clear, and I couldn't continue in a relationship without respect and trust. When I sent him the divorce papers, I didn't expect anything other than a battle. He had always been stubborn, and I knew he wouldn't easily give up on this marriage. But I couldn't go back to him. I couldn't risk my son growing up in an environment where love and honesty no longer existed. As the days went by, I started to feel stronger, but the pain hadn't completely disappeared. My son was the only thing that kept me grounded. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I could love my son, take care of him, but I couldn't overlook the fact that my relationship with my husband had changed completely. He had let his daughter lie without a second thought about me, and that was something I could never accept. He tried to contact me several times, apologizing and asking for a chance to reconcile, but I had decided not to respond. I didn't want to live in the past and his mistakes anymore. I no longer felt I could place my trust in him. Even though I still had moments of weakness, I knew I had to be stronger, for my son and for myself. I had decided that peace and respect were what I needed more than anything else in my life. And even though he regretted his actions, I couldn't go back to him. This marriage was over, and all I could do was move forward into a new life, one that no longer had space for deception and doubt.